Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Copilot L33t, the series where we talk to AI security experts from both inside Microsoft and the wider industry to learn more about this very rapidly evolving field that is, of course, very, very important for all of us. So today I have Mark with me. Mark, welcome.
Hey, Sarah, how's it going?
Not bad. Now, Mark, it's been a whole couple of months since I've seen you in real life and a couple of weeks since I've talked to you. So good to see you again. Mark, before we crack on and have a chat about some of these AI security things, would you like to tell the people who are tuning in who you are and what you do here at Microsoft, if people don't already know?
Sure. So I go by lead cybersecurity architect. I've been at Microsoft like 24 years, so I've learned you can kind of make up your own title to a certain degree. And effectively what I do is I take a look at the whole set of, whatever 50 something, I lost track of the number, like major Microsoft security capabilities. And I look at the problems that our customers are facing through different lenses, CISO, security architect, SOC analyst, IT architect, operations, you name it, all the different roles that have something to do with security, and then figure out what do they need to know and what do they need to understand and build reference architectures, CISO workshops, architecture design sessions, and the like, most of which is actually delivered through our Unified, used to be called Premier Support, and also publish a bunch of things like the cyber reference architecture and CISO workshop, et cetera, publicly as well. So that's kind of where I spend my days, is coasting across the massive craziness of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I think you forgot to mention there as well that you're also, I personally think, the king of making very, very nice PowerPoint slides.
Thank you.
I know. So as this is Copilot Lead Speak, let's jump in and talk about Copilot for security. Now, I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations with customers about how they can integrate that into their environment and the strategic considerations. Let's start at the top, because you cover a lot of different personas. And so at that C-level, CISO level, what are the strategic considerations or the top of mind things that you think leadership should be aware of when they're thinking of adopting this?
Yeah, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, sorry, that was many questions there, Mark.
This may be a longer answer. So let me start with just how I talk to CISOs and related roles around just AI security in general, right? And then we'll talk specifically to the Copilot elements of it. So ultimately, when you think about AI, it changes a lot of things, right? We've always had this dream of a natural language interface that the computer understands us. Well, it can sort of kind of do that now. It can understand the language we use, if not the ideas behind it. And so you have this sort of whole new way of interacting with computers, and it actually operates in a different set of logic. Like, there's traditional computer logic that you program, if then else or whatever. And of course, security bugs or regular bugs that just make it do things, but it does them pretty consistently, right? But AI doesn't follow the same logic. So you really have to sort of think of this as a fundamentally different technology than normal applications and code. And so it's going to affect a lot of different things. It affects defenders, it affects IT, it affects business users, and it affects attackers, because all of them get to take advantage of the benefits of this natural language way of working with computers and asking it to do things that can figure out your intent without you necessarily having to know a specific command or a specific GUI or programming a specific application or code or whatever. And so it gets really interesting really fast. But the big ones that usually come up is, like any new exciting technology, people adopt it fast. Certain people adopt it faster than others. The two that we've seen sort of leading the charge are business users who see the opportunity of it, right? So we see a lot of adoption of, hey, let's go add this to this thing, and then we can make sense of our data, make more money, or accomplish our mission better, et cetera. So that's one of the big ones. And of course, security has to make sure that is secure. So that brings in a whole set of questions, but you have to secure your usage of AI. The attackers also move very fast and have moved fast, and they're out there with fake emails, fake voice messages, fake videos, you name it. Using it to their advantage and to do the things that they want to do. And also, after they get a whole treasure trove of data, why are they going to look through them manually? Why don't they just have the AI reason over it, right? And so they're going to be using these tools and are using these tools, much like the defenders are. And so those tend to be the first two usages that pop into mind. So you have to make sure that your usage of it is done in a safe way. Because, if someone figures out how to get internal data based on the little chatbot you just published, that's probably a bad thing.
Yeah.
And then you've got, and this one's harder, when the attacker usage of it, all of you, the stakeholder you have to worry about is pretty much all the users in your environment, because they now have to be on the alert for even better phishing and all the various, I don't like to use all the various names for the different types of phishing, but through the voice and video and all those kind of things. But ultimately, you've got to get an education campaign out there on, hey, this is going to happen, and make sure people are aware of it. So awareness, like any new big problem, is one of the first things to focus on. And then building all this, the standards and the other things to sort of support it, so that the developers know what they should and shouldn't do with it. And of course, security teams, it's a missed opportunity if you're not using it, right? And that's where sort of the security copilot comes in, is you want to be able to use AI to help you not do 10 steps, you can do 2 steps, right? Similar to any other kind of automation technology. And so those tend to be kind of the big ones, is make sure you're protecting your legitimate use of it, protecting, which also would include not just your internal, hey, we did this with Azure OpenAI, but we did this with ChatGPT or some other third-party thing that's hosted somewhere else. And so protecting your legitimate usage of it, protecting against the attacker's usage of it, and then taking full advantage of the tool for yourself. So those are really kind of the 3 main angles that we end up talking about a lot. We've actually updated the cyber reference architecture, the MCRA, with some slides that cover those particular areas. So.
Now, for anyone who's tuning in who doesn't know what the MCRA is, Mark, do you want to briefly tell folks?
Sure. So MCRA stands for the Microsoft Cybersecurity Reference Architecture. And it started out as a diagram, a single diagram on a single slide, that was answering the question, what the heck does Microsoft have in security, right? And so that's sort of where it all began. And it's, I don't know if I want to say this out loud, but there's a term called marketecture, right? Because some of it is technical and the relationships and the groupings of them, and some of it is just making sure that we're actually showing the stuff so that people understand it. We were very, very careful to make sure that it was actually always technically accurate, et cetera. But sometimes it's just making sure that it's all on there. And it's actually really difficult to diagram all the relationships between 50 plus different capabilities. So we kind of abandoned the lines about 4 or 5 years ago, if I recall correctly. So that was the sort of original capabilities diagram. But over time, people said, well, how does this apply to my security operations center or SOC? And diagrams around identity and access control, around operational technology or OT, sometimes called industrial control system security. All these various different things, infrastructure and Azure security. So a lot of those things all kind of put together. And then the next release, the current release that's out there now, is really focused on showing the reference architecture, not just as here's some cool technical diagrams, but in the context of security adoption framework. What is the overall journey to modernize the security I have, to build a new security program, to build a new component of the security program I didn't have before? And what does good look like? What does it look like to have all those things together? And then very importantly, what are the relationships and the connections between those to help understand how XDR relates to SIEM, how the various different signals from endpoint and identity are then processed by conditional access policy engines and then enforced by conditional access as well as other components. And so it's really kind of a very visual view of the Microsoft security capabilities. And we've also added some vendor neutral ones, right? Yes, it is a Microsoft set of diagrams, but we actually have a number of different slides and we're working on this as a pattern for future releases, that, hey, every single diagram, here's a completely vendor neutral, and you can use these and say, this is my reference architecture, no Microsoft names or anything. And then here's the one with the Microsoft products and technologies on it, so that people can kind of choose which one is most useful to them. And so that's really what the MCRA is.
So Mark, as this is Copilot Leet Speak, I'm going to have to ask you, does it include Copilot for Security?
Yes. Copilot for Security shows up in several places. The ones that pop into my head offhand are the main capabilities diagram, kind of showing where it fits there within primarily Security Operations Center capabilities, and then that Security Operations Center diagram. It is there to show, it is actually linked to the people in that diagram, because it's a very people-centric diagram, because it really does extend the capabilities of the person. It's less about the technology that it's accessing. It's much more about enabling that person to get more done with the tools that they have and the data that already exists. And so it is absolutely and 100% there.
Awesome. Now, I know you have written a lot about zero trust, and you've actually written whole books about it. But how do you see, for organizations that have been on a zero trust journey for a while, how do you see AI helping that, or maybe even hindering it? What are the challenges and things you've seen around there?
Excellent question. Because zero trust is ultimately just the modern way of doing security. It's okay, the firewalls and the IDS and IPS and all the other perimeter proxies and whatnot that we put around our network perimeter, they're not good enough, right? And so zero trust is, how do we do security right? And it's all about protecting the assets wherever they are, whatever network on, et cetera. But that's all zero trust is, this modern security. Some of the old stuff still works. Some of the old stuff doesn't work, right? And so it's just about, okay, how do we refit the whole thing to the reality of today's world where the firewall and the perimeter is not enough? So that's all zero trust is. And so the thing that we found with zero trust and AI is like a two-way relationship. One is like everything else, it's accelerating security and zero trust. And it helps you do a lot of things that used to take a lot more effort. It helps you ramp up people quicker into skills. We found that the Copilot and the AI technologies really enable junior folks that are just starting out to ask questions, to learn. And they don't have to have an expert mentor next to them. That's what Copilot does, is it provides that function for learning. So it's very, very powerful in that way. And then, so that's one way of the relationship. The other is all of this AI stuff is very, very, very disruptive. It's fast moving. I mean, we know that the skills are coming out very quickly, and it's changing what can be done, what can't be done. And so a big piece that we see is that you're never going to manage this with classic security. You cannot manage AI with a firewall and IDS, IPS, and DLP solutions. Like, the classic way of doing security isn't going to help you manage the risk of this. You have to have this asset-centric, data-centric, zero-trust way of thinking in order to manage the AI security. So it's very much a two-way relationship in our experience. And because you did mention the book, this is a Zero Trust Playbook. This is the first of a series of, I think it's going to be 6 or 7, I can't remember off the top of my head. And there is, it was kind of fortunate that it took us a little while to write it, because the AI thing exploded about 2 or 3 months before we were about to publish it. And so we added a whole new chapter 5, I think it is, that covers AI and zero trust. So the Zero Trust Playbook here, it's available on PAC-T and O'Reilly subscriptions, and of course, Amazon and all the usual places you buy books. But we did take a fairly thorough view, kind of talking about those strategic things that I mentioned, as well as what are the limitations of AI? What can it do? What can't it do? And and how likely is it for those limitations to be overcome for AI to do more?
Yeah, now a couple of folks have said to me when I've been having discussions about AI security that because it's very exciting and new, people want to use it a lot. And sometimes folks are using it when it's probably not necessary and might be overcomplicating things and possibly exposing an organization to more risk than the benefits that they will reap from it. Now, I'm curious to hear what your take on that is, Mark, because I know, well, you have a take on everything, and you're a very smart dude, so I like to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very valid set of points. Like at the end of the day, everything has two edges, right? The knife can cut vegetables or it can cut people, right? Like everything, it has, both positive and negative implications. And that's true of, connecting everybody together on the internet. That's true of all sorts of things, including AI. And so there is a lot of opportunity for people to help people, for people to learn complex skills. There's all sorts of different ways that people can get access to stuff. I mean, I love using the image generation myself. One of my favorite ones was I was trying to find a graphic for that expressed the sort of idea of a Groundhog Day. Like if you don't have your security operations people telling your architecture and engineers all the things that they're seeing, they can't block it. And so therefore they keep doing the incident over and over again. I was like, okay, show me a picture of a groundhog. It was just this cute little innocent groundhog. I'm like, make it a dark and stormy night. And of course it was like staring out at this like lightning storm coming in. I'm like, yes, that worked. Now, sometimes I was trying to get some other ideas. I asked it to do a picture of a witch hunt. And that came out really bad. It showed me like a picture of a deer with a hunting rifle and a witch hat on. I'm like, whoa, what are you doing, right? So It's obviously not a perfect technology, but there's some amazing uses for it that really help people achieve a lot of things, much more serious than creating the groundhog looking at the lightning storm. But there are downsides to it, absolutely. Especially if you're not careful and thoughtful about it, especially if you don't understand how the technology works and how to do the protections on it. Because say you put together a chatbot and you train it on your internal company data, and then you make that available to your customers. Well, does your chatbot or the protections around it know what data should be shared with a customer and what data shouldn't be if you train it on internal data? It really doesn't, right? And so there's a lot of things that are sort of easily preventable if you understand how it works. And so there's a lot of potential downsides for it, from the it's a version of all the stuff we already know. So around the data leakage thing, and all those kind of elements. And I think one of the things that's probably going to trip up a lot of folks for just AI in general, less about Copilot specifically, is I mentioned earlier that the logic is different, right? Because right now you run a program and it's going to do the same thing over and over again. Whether that is intentional by the programmer or whether that's a bug and that's how the program works, right? It's very kind of deterministic in that way. But AI doesn't operate that way. AI is, it's got a little bit of randomness to it, right? Because you get here's 4 pictures that seem to do it. And if you ask that 5 times, you're going to get 4 new pictures each time until you run out of little tokens or whatever, right? And so it has this level of randomness to it. And it's very much influenced by the data set it was programmed on, by the model design, by any of that retrieval augmented, I forgot what the G in RAG stands for. I'm sure someone's going to correct me on Twitter or LinkedIn or something like that. But depending on how the system is set up, it's going to be a little bit different each time. And so the AI logic isn't linear. It does things a little different each time. And you need to recognize and understand that because it's based on whatever data was programmed to. So, let's take the written language one, for example, right? It knows all these things about written language as well as visual images and other things. But in the written language, it's going to follow that logic of the human language and guess essentially what is the next word, kind of like a very, very powerful autocorrect or autocomplete type of thing. And so it's great at doing that, but it's the model's interpretation of human language, by the way. It's not literally actual human language. It's as the model understands it. And that flow of logic is different, right? That flow of logic has a different set of vulnerabilities than, writing something to memory and reading it back and then executing one part of code and then reading from memory and then going somewhere else. It's very different than the deterministic programming. It follows a different logic flow. So the vulnerabilities and the ways that you can send it off course, creating biases, training different data, the vulnerabilities are different and the exploits are different And therefore, the defenses are different because it's a completely different way of operating. It's like, the difference between walking and the dangers you're going to face there versus one in an airplane or in a car. So it'll still get you, results and go through the processing, but it's going to do it in a very different way. And the things that could throw you off are very different. If you're walking on the ground, you might have to worry about a puma or a cougar, taking you out. But if you're on an airplane, it's a whole different set of things. It would have to be a bird or a bird strike or, a tall mountain or something that hits you. So it's just a very different way of processing. And so you've got to understand that if you're going to actually mitigate those risks and stay safe, right? Because like anything else, if you do it right, you're safe. If you do it wrong or dangerously, it's not safe, right? And so it's just, that's kind of how I think about that, is like that education and awareness is so, so important that people need to understand that in terms they understand, throughout the organization, like regular human terms, not technical geeky terms like deterministic. Sorry, my bad. But ultimately, that's how I think about that space.
Yeah. Now, I want to know your thoughts on this issue. I think the question I've been asked the most, and this is for adopting any kind of Copilot or AI, is concerns around data security. Now, we know that data security isn't a new challenge or concept, but it seems to me that there's been a lot more focus put on it since this explosion of AI.
Yes.
And again, I'm keen to hear what you think about this one.
So do you remember a Microsoft Office capability called Delve?
No.
Okay. So Microsoft Office Delve, or whatever the product was called, came out in the sort of early to mid years of Office 365 being a thing, sometime in probably the mid 2010s, right? And what it did was it would search for all the stuff you have access to and say, hey, there's interesting stuff going on. There was an update in this document or that document or whatever. And what it was actually doing was finding stuff that you probably shouldn't have had access to. It just made it easier to discover that, hey, someone has allowed way too many people to have permission to these sensitive documents, right? So there's an underlying permission problem where people had way too much permission. People in general across an organization had way too much permission to files and documents and other things they shouldn't have had. And we saw really two reactions once that happened, because there was definitely a very big panic where people were like, oh my God, why do these people have access to these things? Well, they've always had access to it. They just didn't know it until we put a tool in there that made it obvious, right? And so the organizations that took that as a signal and said, okay, we have some permission problems. We need to address those. Let's temporarily turn off this tool, maybe, or not, maybe leave it on. But let's go through and figure out our access permission, develop a classification system, and make sure that only the right people have access to things. The organizations that did that are in really, really, really good shape for AI today, because AI effectively does that through a different discovery mechanism as you go and say, hey, let's go ahead and look for our internal data and program it, et cetera. So organizations that did that are in really good shape. The ones that said, turn it off, and then forgot about it and moved on while leaving that underlying permission problem where people had way too much access to stuff. They just couldn't discover it with Delve as easily. Those organizations are the ones that are having a lot more challenges today. But it's ultimately, the short of it is exposing existing over-permissioning problems and access control problems and lack of data classification problems that already are in the organization. AI itself isn't doing anything wrong. It's just doing its job of discovering the stuff, and it's assuming that you've done a good job of allocating the permissions and that people shouldn't have access to, the unpatented trade secrets and other kind of crazy sensitive stuff. And it's saying, hey, if this person has access to it, therefore they have access to it, and we'll bring that document up. And so those are the big challenges that I see. There's also the data leakage elements, especially because AI can be a bridge if you don't have any of the permission problem. Like say you write your own chatbot or something like that, program with a bunch of internal data, and if it's internal users, then you're definitely going to have that sort of cross user. You shouldn't have access to this thing. But if you take that chatbot and make it public, then the chatbot doesn't know what the customer should do and what the customer should have access to and what the customer should not have access to. And so we see a lot of those sort of, finally facing the challenges that that sometimes have been deferred. Maybe it was just, hey, we did all this through DLP policies. I'm not sure what you think about DLP, but like the way I view it is like it's the last ditch, like trying to grab the data as it's flying out the door. That's kind of the classic DLP approach, as opposed to actually protecting the information where it is in the first place and classifying it, applying encryption, and the phone home for the key and all that kind of stuff. And what I have in mind here is that originally called, I think it was Rights Management Services, and now through a couple different names, it's now Microsoft Information Protection. But being able to protect the data where it is, you definitely want to have that, like as it's leaving the enterprise's control, you want to have that, backup plan, but you want to make sure that the protection is there in place and monitoring it kind of where it is and where it should be, in addition to sort of that jumping out the border kind of thing. But, it's ultimately bringing that to the fore, right? Because, data, the other thing about the data is it's so much more valuable now, right? Because you can't train an AI model, which is big money, right, on AI generated data. It's like a copy of a copy for people that are old enough, bald enough, gray haired enough like me that actually remember making copies in an office. When you make a copy of a copy, it just starts losing fidelity really fast. And so the results you get out of training an AI model on AI generated data aren't good. And so all of a sudden, all of the human generated data in your environment just jumped in value. It's like, hey, you remember that old furniture you have in your house? That's now an antique that's worth 10 times the money. Whoa, what? Right? All of a sudden now the attackers are going after that data because it's so much more valuable. It's good for you as a company, but it's also good for the attackers if they can steal it from you. And the other thing that becomes really important is the provenance of the data, which is a highfalutin technical term that, people that, buy art and is this really a Picasso and whatever I have to think about. But what is the ownership, the sort of chain of custody, as you will, for this data? Do we know if it's human generated or is it AI generated? Do we know the quality of it? And so all of those things, like the sensitivity of it, become very important, because that's very important for the business to capitalize on it. But it's also very important for security to know how valuable it is, and then be able to train the models on it, et cetera. And so data security just in all these different ways becomes super important in this age of AI, because the models are trained on data. And so data just becomes this very central thing, which again, you need a zero trust approach to have that data centric, that asset centric way of thinking and protecting, not a network centric.
Yeah, now I'm sure at least some folks tuning in will know that our data protection and data security suite of products now all falls under Purview. But I wondered, because I have experience with older data security products, and let's face it, they used to be quite clunky and not very easy to use and possibly not efficient. But nowadays, of course, they've improved a lot, right? So it shouldn't be, I believe, so painful. Has that been your experience? And when you've talked to customers about actually doing this data security piece? Because historically, of course, it's always been challenging.
Yeah, I mean, not just that basic sort of trying to grab it on the way out kind of challenge, but a lot of these solutions were kind of a minimal wrapper around regex rules in a lot of ways. It's depending, there's different qualities of tools and capabilities out there, absolutely a range. But yeah, the new generation, sort of the cloud-driven ones that have the interface where you can update and tweak, and as you learn and get feedback from it, kind of that real-time way, and you don't have to deploy anything new to get these benefits. The new generation of tools are a lot better and easier to use than the previous ones. The one thing that really struck me is as it Ignite in 2023, when all of the AI security was sort of coming out in the big thing, and there was a big aspect of it, I was very, very happily I don't want to say surprised, but I was very pleased to see the level of effort and the breadth of effort on AI security and data security that was happening. Because there was a lot of thoughtful things around, hey, the Defender for Cloud Apps now covers AI applications, not just SaaS applications, right? And then the Purview elements were able to look at those DLP, those data protection elements of the AI models. And it was just really, really refreshing to see that kind of broad thinking of it, that not here's one feature of one product and you're good, but they were actually looking at it from that perspective across all of the challenges our customers will face. So that's one of the things that was really kind of cool for me. In addition, of course, all the Copilot elements and bringing all that in there, using the AI. But it was really nice to see how broad and thoughtful they were across the different threats and risks of it, and really kind of bringing that full kind of portfolio or suite to bear on the problem set.
So, Mark, as probably our ultimate question for the day, of course, if folks are tuning into this, no doubt they are interested in AI security and probably implementing AI into their environment. And I've asked most of our guests this, but what would be your top pieces of advice or top tips for any organization that's looking to implement AI and co-pilots in a secure manner?
I think, I'll cover a couple of points I mentioned earlier, which is absolutely look at it in a big picture, holistic way, because there are so many angles for it where defenders have opportunities, the organization itself and the attackers have opportunities. So very much think about it in that holistic way as much as possible. Don't just think, how do I do AI, but how is the attacker going to do it? How is my business going to do it? So thinking about it in that way. That's one of the big ones. And then, of course, you have to prioritize because you don't have infinite amount of time and resources for this, and it's moving fast. The education piece is super, super important. Make sure you're educating yourself and that you're sharing what you learn and your insights with your peers and your colleagues and with your partners in IT, in the business, in security teams. It's really important to make sure that people are sharing and learning because this is a team sport. There's so many angles on this. No one person is going to master AI security and then be the one person that does that in the organization. That's not going to work. That's not going to scale. This has to be just like you understand, people know the basics of networking or identity or endpoints and, using Windows and Linux and what have you. Like, it's just got to be one of those kind of core skills. And so the breadth of it as well. And so that's kind of where my thoughts are on it. And, very much similar, the MCRA, the Cyber Reference Architecture has it. The Chapter 5 here in the playbook has kind of that kind of advice. But, just read, educate yourself, learn are kind of the big ones. And then, of course, share and teach.
Yeah. Well, I think that's fantastic advice, Mark. I think we are about up for time. We could probably do another 4 or 5 episodes between both you and I'm quite sure. But we'll wrap it up there. I know you're a very busy man, so thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of those of you who are tuning in at home, thank you for joining this episode of Copilot LeetSpeak. I hope you found it interesting, and join us again next time where we'll talk to another expert about Copilot for security and the AI security world in general. Until next time, thanks a lot and take care.